Om Shanti Shanti. Namaste, and welcome again to this evening's Bhagavad Gita discourse and webinar. If you remember from last week, Nayaswami Devarshi joined me, and together we began chapter 6 and started with stanza 1. And as you remember also, the subject that we were discussing last week was that of renunciation. How it doesn't matter whether one is outwardly engaged in activities, a householder in the world, doing one's duties, or whether one is in more of a disengaged, reclusive life. In either case, not one path is better than the other, but that both are appropriate. The important point being that we live our lives as renunciates. Renunciation applies not specifically to the outward mode of our living, but yet to the inner attitude with which we approach life. Renunciation of the sense of I, my, me, mine. Renunciation of that, the ego, in other words, to be able to transcend, to live a life of transcendence, a life of service, a life that reaches out beyond our own immediate needs to embrace everybody, and so that our consciousness expands to embrace that larger reality. And as we were discussing the topic of renunciation, we were using the opportunity to discuss the points of what makes a renunciate in this book by Swami Kriyananda, A Renunciate Order for the New Age. And in this book, Swami Kriyananda discusses this topic very directly and gives 14 points or particular qualities to look for. You could say not to look for in other people, for each of us in our approach to renunciation, to introspect and look within ourselves to see how we ourselves are doing in this path of renunciation, or things that we can improve upon in our own life. And so we covered the first 7 of the 14 points, 1 through 7, and so it seemed appropriate that since we weren't able to complete the complete 14, that we'd come back the subsequent week and cover points 8 through 14. But also, coming back to the Gita, we began last week with chapter 6 and stanza 2. And so I would like to use the opportunity tonight now to continue with the Gita, because the topic is pertinent and continues also to the topic we began with last week. And so if you remember, as I said, the Gita begins chapter 6 discussing renunciation, the outward and both the inward path, and the spirit that needs to animate either of those outward modes of approaching the spiritual life. But the Gita and Krishna go on to say here in stanzas 2, 3, and 4 a little bit further about this. And I'll read. Krishna is speaking here. Understand, O Pandava, that what the scriptures call sannyasa, renunciation, is the same thing as yoga. Indeed, without renunciation of selfish motive, sankalpa, one cannot be a true yogi. You see, here again, Krishna makes that point. Renunciation is the essence of what we want to practice as yogis. The Muni, aspiring to the spiritual heights through scientific yoga action on achieving his goal, finds perfect vibrationless peace. He who has overcome attachment not only to sense objects but to sensory activity, and who has achieved freedom from all ego-motivated planning, is said by the wise to attain Yoga Rudra, the firm union of soul and spirit. And although that, without a bit of study and just listening to me read that, it may seem a bit obscure, what Krishna is speaking to here is exactly the same thing that Patanjali is addressing in the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras begin by the definition of yoga as the neutralization of the waves of likes and dislikes, these waves of feeling of the heart. And it says when the waves are neutralized, the self resides within the self. and in a state of perfect union. But when one is not in a state, the likes and dislikes of the heart of Chitta are disturbed, the self does not rest in the self, but instead we identify with those things outwardly. And so here Krishna, again, he's saying, he who overcomes attachment not only to sense objects, but to sensory activity. See, one who is identified with that outer sensory activity cannot rest in the self. And we've talked about this before in previous chapters, where we discussed Krishna's exhortation to Arjuna to withdraw from the self, or from the senses, withdraw from the senses and go within and find that steadiness, that calmness within. And here again, when we're beginning this very, very deep chapter on yoga, chapter 6, he's again emphasizing this necessity to go within, get away from the sensory objects, and to be able to identify deeply within the self, and to, in that inner self, begin to experience that inner kingdom. And this too can be defined. This is the renunciation that, in the yogic sense, is being referred to. Is we're renouncing that identification with the outer world as our true reality, and instead affirming an inner reality, because renunciation by itself is not enough. We can't just say, I'm not this, I'm not that. And you might say it's like peeling the onion until there's nothing left. That is often recommended, but it's also the yogi simultaneously, while rejecting or renouncing, also identifies and has a positive direction to one's spiritual life. And so when we speak of renouncing the ego, yes, we do. We renounce the ego not in the sense of destroying it or minimizing it, but Swami Kriyananda liked to take the positive approach. He says, don't think of it in that way. Think of it instead of expanding. Now we think, oh, expanding the ego, that's just to make me an egotist. It's not that at all, but it's expanding our sense of identity, that we're not just this little self. There's something more to this reality. And so when we can begin to see that I'm not just this little body, but I'm something more as well. I'm in you. I'm in the world around me. I'm in others, and this sense of expansion of our identity takes place. We can't naturally but feel the sense of brotherhood and affinity with the world around us. And so this path of renunciation, as we begin to inculcate that attitude within ourselves, that reality and realization within ourselves, very naturally, outwardly our attitudes begin to change, our approach to life begins to change, and the world itself, the inner world, at least, it begins to change, and the outer world begins to respond to us in a different way, in sympathy with that attitude of renunciation that we have in our heart. So it's not a negative path; it's actually a very positive path. It's embracing our true self. And so what we're going to do this evening is we're going to complete. I'm going to allow first Nayaswami Devarshi is going to begin with the eighth point that Swami made about the qualities of a renunciate, and then we'll continue one by one through the 14.
Before I read number 8, I would just like to add something about the Gita reading that was very, very personal to me, about this connection between yoga and renunciation. Many years ago, I heard a very wise yoga teacher describe yoga and the techniques of yoga as a technology. And because this person was wise, my own confusion around that use of the word made me run to the dictionary. And it was very interesting to see the definitions of technology jibe with the principles in the techniques of yoga. I'll read 2 common definitions right from the mainstream English dictionary defining technology: a manner of accomplishing a task, especially using technical processes, methods, or knowledge. And the second definition, a capability given by the practical application of knowledge. And so it describes basically yoga as a manner, a set of tools, practices to help us achieve a particular end. But it's also very interesting, it describes yoga as the end itself, a capability given by the practical application of knowledge. This was very personal to me because when I first came onto the spiritual path, like many people, I had the desire to find God, to find myself as Satchidananda, divine bliss. And so the next step was, how do I do that? Because I struggled on my own for a time to do that. I read books, I went out into the mountains and the forest and tried to meditate. But finally I realized I needed more. I needed a technology to help me, techniques to help me to achieve the ability to renounce myself and offer myself into God as divine bliss. Swami Kriyanandaji, his explanation of one of these stanzas here, where Krishna says, the Muni aspiring to the spiritual heights through scientific yoga action. And Swamiji describes that scientific yoga action as the techniques and the practices of Kriya Yoga. And so yoga essentially is a vehicle that allows us to completely renounce ourselves back into divine bliss. How does it do this? Well, one way that it does it, it gives us control over the life force. It gives us pranayama. Paramhansa Yogananda had an affirmation that he gave to his students, which describes, in a sense, how the techniques of Kriya Yoga, of meditation, of all true spiritual teachings, help us to be able to find perfect and true and deep renunciation. His words are, teach me to own again, O own again, my matter-souled mind and brain, that I may give them to Thee in prayer and ecstasy, in meditation and reverie. And so the technology of yoga, these techniques, they give us control and the power over ourselves to allow us to be able to completely renounce, meaning offer ourselves, as Jaya was saying here, offer ourselves into the infinite in expansion, in letting go. And so these techniques of yoga are sacred because they enable us to do the most sacred thing of all, which is give ourselves back into the divine. And they're also tools and techniques, and it's a combination of this sacredness and the technique that Kriya Yoga, a very, very powerful tool for allowing us to really, truly, deeply renounce. So, on that subject of renunciation, we'll read the last 7 of these things, these statements from Swami Kriyanandaji. He describes these with an introductory paragraph. What then are the marks of those whom I would consider worthy of being accepted as true renunciates? They would be those who have achieved noteworthy progress toward the attainment of the following virtues. And last week, we read the first 7, and here is number 8. They are impersonal in the sense of wanting nothing for themselves, but never in the sense of being indifferent to the needs of others. This is describing this attitude of kindness, compassion for others. I've seen this occasionally, where people who are impersonal to the extreme, especially when it comes to others, and they'll see some other person suffering very deeply, and they'll say, all is Ram, all is Ram, all is the infinite, all is God. But then, when they suffer, they say, ouch, or that hurts. And all of a sudden, they're no longer this impersonal approach to yoga. And so this reverses that towards our own pain and suffering. Be impersonal. Also be impersonal to your own personality. I have found this a very helpful practice, that we really are not what we think we are. We look in the mirror and we see this person who has certain definitions by our views in terms of certain qualities, certain personality quirks, certain ways of behaving, and try to be even impersonal from that. And you'll find that when you're impersonal with yourself, not in a cold way, but just in a way of just looking beyond the personality, looking beyond the pain and suffering that everybody goes through in life, you start to go deeper and you start to go into the true self, and you start to understand yourself more and more as divine joy. But when it comes to others, the true renunciate, Swamiji is saying, has a great deal of compassion, a great deal of understanding, kindness, and also the desire to help others. This is the mark of the great saints and masters. They have an extraordinary, superhuman, you could call it, because divine compassion for those who are suffering. And their desire, again and again, is for an avatar, a great master like Paramhansa Yoganandaji, is to reincarnate again and again for the sole purpose of serving mankind, of lifting people out of their suffering, out of their delusion, people who you might look upon as bad people because they are erring and making mistakes in ways that cause themselves and others to suffer. But this is the type of compassion of the Master. Even towards those who betray them, who persecute them, they only see these people, again, as making a mistake that is causing them suffering, but is not causing the Master any suffering, because towards his own pain and karmas, they are impersonal and they accept these things as coming from God. So this is one of the great marks of the true renunciate.
I think second what Devarshi just said, many times you find that the popular attitude toward a saint is, oh, he's just above it all. Well, perhaps to himself he's above it all, in the sense he is above it all. He's not identified with that personality, that body. But in terms of other people, he's not above it all by any means. I remember something from Swami Kriyananda. Last week, as we were reading the earlier definitions of a renunciate, we talked about defending oneself. And Swami wouldn't defend himself at all. But yet, if one of his friends or one of his students or something was under a trial and had been perhaps attacked in some way verbally, he was very, very quick to defend that student and to defend another person, because he took it very seriously, his loyalty and his friendship to others. So he would jump in real quickly and help that person. But when it came to himself, he let it go. And so is this personalness, impersonalness is a very good thing to remember toward oneself. Be impersonal, one's likes and dislikes. Again, coming back to what Patanjali was saying, over one's likes and dislikes. But yet, when dealing with other people, looking to see what's right and what's proper, and thinking of that person's personal welfare. Now, coming to the next one, number 9. They see all things as striving toward the attainment of Satchitananda, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss, no matter how presently misguided the efforts of some people may be. Thus they feel kinship with everyone and with all life. They see all things as striving toward the attainment of Satchitananda. In other words, what they see is everything in relationship to the ultimate goal. They don't see, they don't focus on perhaps the mistakes that people make, or the byways or the bypass that people engage in, in their self as well, the various difficulties that we create for ourselves. They don't identify and see life in those terms. It's all in relationship to the ultimate goal to which everybody is moving. And if we see that, we see, yes, the neighbor, the friend, the relative, all of them, in all of their very unique, sometimes we might think even misguided ways, they're all striving. And we see the underlying motive of all people is to attain that ultimate bliss, that realization of Satchitananda. And when we see that we're all on the same path, nobody is not on the spiritual path. There's no such thing as not being on the spiritual path, because all of us are following the path to the same ultimate goal. Some of us perhaps are moving along that path a little bit more consciously, but when we see our world around us in relationship from that highest point, and we pick up the string of life from that highest point in relationship to that, then we see naturally coming to us is a sense of embrace for everybody as our brothers and sisters, and also we can see ourselves in that light as well, and it helps us to have a kindly family feeling for everybody.
Swamiji is saying here again, do not judge, because everything and everyone is part of that divine bliss. Those who are ignorant of it, and to some extent we all are, unless we are a God-realized master, we will all make errors in judgment, mistakes, And so, as Jaya ji says, be kind, be compassionate towards others as your own fellow seekers towards divine freedom. Swamiji, in his Living Wisely, Living Well readings for this week, he basically says the same thing. He said, everyone is trying to see or seek and find divine bliss. They are just doing it in mistaken ways. So don't judge them for the ways that they make those mistakes in their seeking. But also understand that whatever mistake someone has made, we have made at some point in a past lifetime. And so just try to help others if you can. Bless them, give them light, give them joy, especially give them kindness and compassion in their ignorance. And again, this is what you see the great saints doing, is trying to lift those up who have made mistakes, who have fallen astray from the true path. And so have that kindness towards others, and you'll find that your own heart tends to grow and expand as you feel all as your brothers and sisters in God. Number 10, they accept nothing as their own, but only as being on loan to them for the benefit of others. This is in a way, this describes Paramahansa Yoganandaji's approach to renunciation. He said that he called Saint Francis of Assisi, the great Italian saint, as his patron saint. But he said that Francis, while he worshipped Lady Poverty, as he called it, because his monks took vows of poverty, Yoganandaji said that he preferred Lady Simplicity, which meant that live a simple life. Yes, we all must have belongings to make our lives simpler. If we renounced everything, then we would be dependent on others and have to take from them. Live simply, use everything as something that God has given us. I just came from America here to India, and in America for many, many years I owned an automobile. And this automobile took me to many places where I was able to serve others. And if I had depended on others for these things, that would have been less spiritual in a way. And so I also saw this automobile as belonging to God, belonging to the Guru. It wasn't mine. It was something given to me to help me serve them more easily and serve better. And have the same attitude towards your clothes, even towards your physical body. Saint Francis, again of Assisi, he referred to his body as brother donkey. He lived with other monks, and they were all brother this and brother that. And he saw his own body as brother donkey, some beast of burden that sometimes he would have to beat with a stick to try to make it do God's bidding, and was trying to drag him along or keep him from serving. And so just try to see everything as belonging to God. Worship God in the form of simplicity and not in the form of poverty. Live a simple life, and also see, again, everything that you own is belonging to God. The other extreme, Paramahansa Yoganandaji told the story. He was in a park one day in the United States, and a man was there who was very slovenly and unkempt and long hair and hadn't bathed. And this man shouted out to Yoganandaji, "I am a renunciate." And I think we see this type of renunciate in India, just as we do in America. People who have really mostly renounced responsibility and taking care of their own bodies and self in a more enlightened way. And Yoganandaji, the way he put it, he said, "But you are bound again by your attachment to disorder." And so he was saying this person was attached to living the particular life that he was living. He really hadn't renounced anything inwardly. He was living a life of attachment to living a slovenly life and not having any responsibilities and not giving to others. True renunciation includes giving, actively service to others. And so try to live the life of renunciate more inwardly rather than outwardly, renouncing ego, renouncing attachment to objects rather than the objects themselves.
I'm not sure if it was the same story or not, but with that man that Master met, but or perhaps it was another. He said, "We haven't renounced the world has renounced you." he wasn't able to handle responsibilities. But isn't this, one of the sources of great anguish that we find in life is when we cling to anything. We cling to possessions. We cling to our favorite toy, or whatever that might be. And to the degree that we cling, the greater that clinging, that we hang on to it, the greater the pain will come when inevitably it's taken away. Your favorite automobile will get a dent in it, or the favorite whatever your latest toy is, it's stolen, away it goes. And then you feel that pain in the heart. Don't cling to anything like that, and you find a sense of freedom that comes. But also remember, with this sense of ownership, that nothing is really ours, and this really applies to people as well. Often people cling, they think they don't cling much to physical things, but they cling to other people, and they have a sense of ownership. You belong to me, or you owe me something. You owe me certain behavior. Parents, very often, they cling to their children, and they feel that their children belong to them, as we might say, as a possession of some sort. But then the children, inevitably happens, and children grow up, they go their own way, and oftentimes they go in ways that the parents don't agree with. But nevertheless, nobody owns another person, or nobody owns actually anything in this world. And we have to do our duty by the things that are given to us to responsibly take care of, and that of course is children as well. And we have to do our duty by them, but in the end they have to go their own way, and we can't have that clinging sensation. We have to give freedom to the things around us, and also particularly to the people around us as well, friends as well. We can't cling to them. And you can see this really is a mark of friendship, when you can allow that freedom to your friends. And oftentimes friendships founder on the rocks of when we cling to expectations of how somebody else should treat us, and we're demanding respect. We can't demand respect, just as we can't demand love from anybody. We can earn it, we can do our best to solicit that, but it's nothing ultimately in the end belongs to us. The next one is number 11. They view pleasure and pain equally, as opposite or dual expressions of eternal divine bliss. And here again, actually, that's quite similar to the one I read before. So they view everything as a manifestation of Satchidananda. So too, even pleasure and pain. Now we think of divine. You see, when we think of bliss, we think of it in terms of pleasure. We think of it as it's a higher gradation of pleasure, and yes, in some way it is. But we think, on the one hand, we have pleasure and we have bliss on this hand, and the opposite is pain on the other hand. But that's not really the way to look at it, because bliss, you could say, is in the midst of every experience. There's a point of bliss in the midst of it. And bliss or pleasure, pain, those are things of this body. But transcending this body is what bliss is. That Satchidananda includes everything. And when we can remove our consciousness away from the vicissitudes of life, the ups and the downs of life, we see then in the midst of everything, it's God's play. We see it's God's play in the storms, in the thunder, in the rain, and all of those things that we think of, we associate with, oh, those are bad things, I don't want them. But on the other hand, we see it's God's play in the other side as well. Everything that, when we get the parking space, when we find that fortune rains upon us for one, God's there as well. And we see it's all God's play. And if we have this attitude, we find that if we're rest in that attitude of whatever comes, let it come. We rest in that attitude of joy. We see that all of God's play is part of that bliss of God. And this was Swami Kriyananda's approach to life. Many were the times he would use this image of pleasure and pain. He says everybody seems to, everyone's attracted to pleasure, I suppose. But he would say very few go into the heart of pain as well. And he would often use the example of himself going to the dentist, of how just going into the pain itself of the dentist chair, getting into the very essence of it, it begins to go beyond the pain. You see beyond the ups and downs into a certain midpoint there where it's just sensation, it's just vibration, it's the association of I don't like this that makes us identified as pain. But it's just something that's happening to us, and there in the center of that, bliss resides there, just as well as in the other times, the opposite times when we're very happy and enjoyable and things are going our way.
I think people spend a lot of time and energy and effort trying to avoid pain. And as the body grows older, it starts to experience the wheels start falling off, to use an expression about old automobiles. And pain conditions start cropping up. I've been experiencing this for a few years with some chronic pain conditions. And I may not look old enough to be at that point, but the body is inevitably starts to complain. I heard someone recently say that about their daily pain condition as they were growing older. They said, if I wake up one morning and I don't have pain, then that means that I'm dead, is the way they put it, wryly. And it showed an acceptance of pain in a way that was refreshing to see, because they had stopped complaining. I have found that when I'm experiencing physical pain, that sometimes initially the mind complains about it and wishes that it were not so, but it can be helpful to just reflect and realize that this body has also experienced pleasure in this lifetime. In the end, as Swami Kriyanandaji says, everything balances out to zero. After all these many lifetimes, all the aspects of duality, pleasure, pain, wealth, poverty, everything has to be balanced out to zero in the end. And so when I'm experiencing pain, it can help just to reflect that I'm just balancing the scales, and God is balancing the scales for me when I don't choose pain, because I don't choose it necessarily. But so just try to see that beyond this duality is divine bliss. And even in the very moment before the scales have been balanced, we can still go, as Jayaji said, behind the pain. And I have found this helpful at times when experiencing extreme pain, to really tune in more deeply to God, not as a way of avoiding the pain, or asking God, please take this pain away from me, but just sharing it with God. And even I have found it very helpful in a very humorous way, just to go to God and share as a child that I'm your child, I didn't ask to be born. Yoganandaji said, complain to God sometimes in this way. I did not ask to be born. He said, pray to God that way. And I pray and I say, oh, and you didn't train me either, how to work things out and how to deal with the senses. And because of that, I created karma. And it's all your fault. And Yoganandaji was very keen on blaming God for this whole situation down here. And so try to find some humor or some joy or bliss. And if you work with it in this way, you will find creative ways of getting behind pain and seeing actually that there is divine bliss underneath everything. And pain can be a very good prod to help us to go in that direction. And so when experiencing that, don't get into complaining or wishing that it were not so, and use it as a prod to go deeper, to go underneath, to go beyond duality, and to see the divine bliss that is underneath everything, including pain. The next one, number 12, is very simple, very clear. The mark of a true renunciate. They have meditated daily for years. Very simple, renunciates. Essentially, what Swamiji is saying here is that with the techniques of yoga meditation, using that technology for many, many years, takes you to the point where you can finally more and more easily renounce the little self, offer it into the bigger self of divine bliss. And you'll find that those who have had a strong, deep meditation practice for many years, it gives one an extraordinary capability, in a sense, ability to be able to go deeper, to go behind pain, to go behind pleasure, because it takes us deep into ourself. And I honestly don't know how one can get to that point without the stillness, the depth, the control of the life force that comes through the meditation practices. And so, most of all, work at developing a regular daily meditation practice. I would say that this is probably the greatest habit that someone can develop in this lifetime, because you find if you are at a young age, or even at an older age, if you from this day forth, if you haven't already, develop the daily practice of meditation, and you will find that the benefits from that will be greater than anything else. One time towards the end of his life, Swami Kriyananda was going through a surgery, and while he was recovering, he was unable to meditate and practice Kriya Yoga. And our doctor, physician at Ananda, he said to Swamiji, he felt bad and said, I feel bad because you cannot practice Kriya Yoga right now in the state you're in. And Swami just smiled blissfully, and he said, I have a lot of Kriyas in the bank. And essentially he was saying, while he was able to meditate when his body was younger and healthier, he put a lot in the bank. He was able to store up, and not store up in the sense of it being a thing that you store or a good karma that you store. It was more the spiritual depth that you achieve. And more at a certain point, it does not require meditation to go into that. Meditation helps you to go deeper and deeper into that. But a meditation practice of many years gives one the ability to deal with things like surgeries and pains and all the things that happen in life. And so develop a daily practice of meditation and stick with it over many years, and you will not be able to recognize yourself and your ability to deal with all the vicissitudes of life, all the ups and downs, and eventually it gives you the greatest ability of all to tune in to Satchidananda, divine bliss, and become free of these ups and downs and these waves of duality.
Master said that we can change ourselves instantly if we have it's just a matter of changing our thoughts. But the reality is we're bound by these thoughts, and it's not just a matter of I can say I'm free right now, but it doesn't make me free right now. It's time to be able to affect that, and that the changes that we really want to make to ourselves, all of us want, to become free in this lifetime, it does take time, and we have to recognize that. If we're not willing to invest that time, we are going to have a very difficult time being able to affect the changes that we really want in ourselves. Oftentimes students come to the classes that we give and to the discourses, and they take up the practice of meditation and they try it for a few months, but they become discouraged and they go away. Or maybe they take it up for a year or two or three, and they become discouraged because they haven't all of a sudden become saintly to the degree that they had been anticipating. And away they go. And then we're not going to be able to make the progress we want unless we're willing to make a commitment. If you say, I'm going to try this for a year or two and then let's see what happens, well, that's good to get you started. But why not take it a step further? If we really want to make the changes of changing who and what these habits that we have, to perfect it, to clean up perhaps the mess from lifetimes, why not commit a lifetime to it? Now maybe that sounds radical, but think about it. How many lifetimes has it taken? How many lifetimes have we gone through up to this point? Why not take at least one? Now you could say, some people say, well, I'm going to commit every lifetime in the future. Well, you can't do that because you don't have control to make that commitment. But you do have the ability to commit this lifetime if you choose to. And so why don't you do that? Commit this lifetime. I'm going to try my best, Guru. With your help, God's grace, I'm going to give it my all. And that's what you'll need in order to be able to affect the changes that you want to have. 100% commitment. Commitment is the essential decision on your part that you need to make. And if you make that commitment unreservedly, you'll find that God and Guru's grace comes and supports you and will take you to the goal that you're seeking. The second to last one, the 13th one, is because they are always happy in themselves, they are impervious to insults, suffering, failure, defeat, or disaster. They strive to live the ideal that Paramahansa Yoga voiced when he said, "You should be able to stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds." Stand unshaken in the midst of crash of breaking worlds. In other words, what he's saying is be happy in every circumstance. Many years ago, the story I've told a number of times, but many years ago somebody came up to me and asked me the extent of my powers. And of course he was talking about psychic powers. Could I levitate or so do such things like that? And I had to tell him, much to his disappointment, I'd say, "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't have any powers." And then I thought about it a little bit, just paused a moment, and I said, "Well, actually, I think I do have a little bit power." And he was very taken with that. And I says, I have some power to choose to be happy if I wish. And of course he just laughed at that, but he didn't realize how serious I actually was in making that statement, because this is the power that, if we have it, is, I think, perhaps one of the supreme powers to have. That ability to actually choose how we react to the world around us. And this is the power that comes from renunciation. If we renounce, we're being able to, the little things of life, they don't bother us. And of course they don't bother us, not because we're indifferent to them, not because we don't feel, not because that we've closed ourselves off to them, but that we have chosen instead an alternate reality to affirm that bliss nature, that Satchidananda within ourselves. And to the degree that we can make that choice, then we'll find that we attain that sense of freedom that all of us are seeking. I then, thinking about that response to that fellow afterwards, I said, yes, it's true. I do have some power. I can see, just as we all have, that power to make that choice to be happy. But I had to admit, sometimes I didn't choose it. And looking back, I said, yes, that was my choice. That was my choice. I had that part to choose, but why didn't I choose it? And I thought there was something, there's that, and of course what it is, it's habit. It's habits, it's tendencies from the past. I chose that other, but probably I chose it because in some way, even the vicissitudes of life's sufferings, there's probably something there that I wanted, and mistakenly, I think, and mistakenly wanted, and I saw happiness potential there as well. But sometimes we recognize in ourselves, we don't always choose wisely. But more important is having the ability to make that choice. Before we can choose good or ill, before we can choose wisely or unwisely, we have to develop within ourselves the ability to make that choice. And that's what meditation gives us. You've meditated, as we said in the previous reading, or the previous quality, meditated for many years. That's what it gives us. It gives us that power to choose how to respond to the world. And then how we choose, that takes a little bit of wisdom, and that too will come.
The great yogis have taught that suffering does not depend on the outer circumstances. It depends on our reaction to them. Swami Kriyanandaji, Yoganandaji described this as the reactive process, and that if we get control of that reactive process through techniques of yoga, through pranayama, then no matter what happens outwardly, we can bring the life force up the spine to the point between the eyebrows and experience divine bliss under all circumstances. And so this is the real superpower, the siddhi that Jayaji was talking about. It is that it comes from yoga. It is that yoga gives us the power to be happy, to be blissful at will. And that power comes from control of the life force developed over time spent meditating, practicing techniques such as Kriya Yoga. And in the end, that is the greatest siddhi or power of all, which is the ability to choose to be in divine bliss under all circumstances, no matter how positive or how negative. If you think about it, that is the greatest gift that you can probably experience or give someone, and that is the gift that God and the Masters have given us through these sacred teachings of meditation and Kriya Yoga. The final one, number 14, the true renunciate. They strive to love God unceasingly and ever more deeply in a spirit of utter openness to be guided by His will. And that's very simply describes almost a childlike attitude towards the divine, which is to be as a child, trusting God, trusting the Guru to guide our lives, to help us go in the right direction. And when we live by that attitude of renouncing our own desire and will to do what we want to do, and when we offer that up, it's a little scary to be able to start doing that. But when we offer up our own willpower and desires and say, Lord, I want to do Thy will. I want to act as You want me to act. And you'll find that there is an extraordinary freedom in that. There was a disciple of Yoganandaji, Sister Gyanamata, and she did whatever her guru said. And someone who was a visitor saw her doing this, and they said, don't you have free will of your own? Can't you act on your own and just do what you want? Why do you have to always do what the Guru says? And she said, yes, you're right. I've given up my will and I do what the Guru says, but ever since I've been doing that, I've been supremely happy and blissful, essentially is what she was meaning. So experiencing this pattern of life of giving one's own will to the divine, acting with the divine will, you'll find that there is true freedom, true joy, and an extraordinary amount of what Jayaji was talking about in the beginning, of expansion of the ego from this little self to merge and become one with the divine self.
Thank you all for joining us this evening for this class on the Bhagavad Gita. Please join us again next week and we'll share further. Many blessings to all of you.